thinking that in terms of an editor, I think the future of magazines or editors for us, all of us, if we want to move on forward with what we do, I can see that the role of the editor-in-chief is changing. Increasingly, I am becoming a curator rather than a traditional editor. Maybe I do not write anymore. I don't even probably rewrite text. I've got team who do good headlines. You have photographers who can take good pictures, yes. But then more and more, you are not like a traditional editor. I think you are like a curator. You know where everything is. You have a vision of things coming together. You decide on an angle to approach it and brief the team. And the team is not one team. It's just a big team of a lot of things. So you are like an orchestra conductor or a curator of an exhibition. Or like a film director.
They're my favorite issues when an editor comes up with a theme, whether it's the age issue or it's the youth issue, and I love those because it's sort of you're curating a magazine based on that particular theme, and everything in that magazine is reflective of that particular theme. And I love those issues because it allows you to explore them in detail, from different points of view. And I think that when you can approach, as a curator, you can approach things sociologically. You can approach it from a literary model. You can approach it from an art historical model. You can approach it from a psychoanalytical model. And I think that when you have one subject, if it's about nature, for example, you can approach that idea through fashion in so many different ways. And I think that it's really, I find those issues
so
really interesting.
Now I start to think I don't do these theme issues enough. I need to go to change my September issue now. We should do something. Yes, we do. And then of course that's where the commercial thing starts to set in, because when you have these issues, then you have the commercial plans there. So that's why I say it's a mega producer's job now. There's a creative side, because you also have to understand the business side. I mean, these days for media, it's hard enough globally, and you can't let go of the money in there. So then you have to think, oh God, that issue, these, need to come in. How do we make everything work? And there's conflict because there's the commercial element from the brands. And then there's the celebrities' involvement, their egos and whatever they need and all this. And then all sorts of creatives, because we deal with, at Vogue level, everybody you deal with is a celebrity in his own or her own area. Pretty much A-listers. And they all have their own point of view. And to use a bad word is ego, but use a positive word is that they have their principles and their own points of views. And these days,
integrity.
Very good, integrity, and that's why they are special. They are good because they don't just say yes to everything. But everybody says, my way is the best. And then as the conductor, you still have to hold all of them to move in one direction. And I really think that I'm just, the conductor. It's pretty much that. And now with digital, everything is becoming more complicated. But I think designer is the same. A real fashion house, whatever you call it, a designer, creative director, whatever, the head of the creative, I feel that person, you don't have to be a conductor or a curator, but you have to have the mind of a curator. I think is... first, you need to have a broad vision like yourself. You need to look at a lot. You see a lot. You know where everything is. And you also need to understand what they represent, what's special about them. And you may not incorporate them all, but I feel today's world, you need that understanding to do it. That's why I think when we were discussing that, is that if you're a designer who only knows how to make clothes, you end up working for someone like Virgil, who can't design but who has a vision. And that endless supply of energy and ideas because he knows so much. It's a bit like Hal. Even though he's like a head of a big house like Chanel, commercially successful, all that. But if talk to him, you're struggling. I'm always struggling. But, yes, his accent, but also his references.
He's amazing. Yeah.
You just feel, oh God, what is This he's talking about.
He pulls things from everywhere.
Yes.
And he never, he's somebody who's always about the future. He never looks back. He's always about the future and what's the next big thing, the next trend. Yeah, he's extraordinary like that. But I think that, you know, it's also about relevance as well, don't you think? Because I think that that's what, you know, what defines fashion is its relevance to contemporary culture. So you do have to be engaged. You do have to be engaged with fashion, with art, with culture, with politics. Because I think that, you know, fashion. I love looking when you look back. You have a 50s garment. It's emphatically 1950s, and it brings back all these different types of cultural memories and associations with it. I think that from that point of view, you know, fashion is a barometer of our time. So I think that that's its power, and I think so many artists nowadays want to work with fashion designers because they understand the power of fashion. You know, the power of fashion is its accessibility, its democracy. It's the fact that it can respond to the zeitgeist so quickly and so immediately in a way that art can't.
Yes.
So I think that
and can influence a lot of people's lives.
Hugely influential, and it's because it's attached to the body, because the canvas of fashion is the body, that it allows you to convey really complex ideas about identity, about gender, about race, about sexuality. So fashion is such an important medium of artistic expression, and I think that's why a lot of artists, you know, want to collaborate with designers because of its inherent sort of the power.
Maybe, you know, when you have some free time, maybe we can do something. No?
I would love to.
No?
I would love to.
Treat it as a mini curation.
Yeah,
of
I would
some
love to.
sort.
I would love to.
No, do something, maybe with the Chinese design, or maybe with a mixture. Oh, no, we don't need to narrow it down to one category. I think the world has become small, one world. I don't think, you know, we have to decide on anything based on where people come from. No?
I think so too, and I think just in terms of
even these kids, you know, you just met, they were all educated somewhere. Some have based here, been based in London. So it's very hard to define you know, where they come from.
I think that, you know, people sometimes get into will see the designers downstairs and say the Chinese. And I didn't feel that at all. Yes, of course, you know, the majority of them were born in China, but you know, the clothes aren't Chinese. I mean, it's a very complicated sort of argument. You know, when you talk about one's nationality and how that's expressed in fashion. Like nowadays, when we did China Through the Looking Glass, for example, and somebody, a journalist, Chinese journalist, asked me, why are you stopping at the Mao suit? And I said, well, you know, because since the Mao suit, what garment has expressed Chinese identity from the Mao suit? And she couldn't answer it. I couldn't answer it because
I think that was Xiaowei, wasn't it?
It was. She was a tough interviewer.
I know, I saw it.
She wasn't easy.
That wasn't a good point. I mean, it's so easy to confront with those questions.
Yeah.
And I think it's much more sophisticated, the answers should be. And we saw it. I think it's a very cheap sort of a thought, you know, from that angle.
Well, I think also, you know, she...
You know, I like her, yes, she's a friend, but that particular one, I don't think she did very well.
I think also she was confusing cultural appropriation with authenticity.
Yes.
Because what is authentically Chinese? What's authentically British? What's authentically American? Like the Mao suit, for example. Yes, you know, it became a symbol of communism. It became a symbol of China, but it was based on Western tailoring techniques.
Yes.
So there was a conversation and a hybrid of East and West. And even with, and that's what I think is interesting is when one talks about Orientalism, it's easy to talk about cultural appropriation. It's a very easy argument to make. It's harder to talk about how myths are created and that there was a dialogue between the East and the West to create this mythology of China or the mythology of England. I did a show called Anglomania, which was the same idea as China Through the Looking Glass, this idea of a mythology that was perpetuated in one's own culture.
Yes.
So I think Orientalism, of course, is awful. It's a horrible approach, and it's always about objectifying the culture. But at the same time, you know, if one goes beyond this idea of of cultural appropriation, it gets into more interesting debates about how myths are created and how cultures are complicit in creating a mythology. So the show was really trying to look at it in a more nuanced approach.
I know I got a lot of questions from media here too when we came back about this, because I mean obviously it was a huge success, but on the other hand there was a lot of voice saying that it was typical Westerners looking at we Chinese, and a lot of media came to ask me. I answered some of them. I just say, look, it's just typical you guys, right? When the Western world, the whole world, don't talk about China, you say, oh, nobody talks about us. And then they put out a fabulous exhibition, right? Beautiful exhibition, celebrate your culture, but in their own way, interpretation. And then you are still unhappy. I mean, what else can the world do to highlight Chinese fashion or Chinese culture in any way that to make you guys feel happy about it? Of course, they are not experts because you are Chinese. You obviously, we know our history better. But it's what people were expecting when you talk about traditional Chinese culture. You talked about you had to present it in an academic way, like through the right historical time frame or whatever the details needs to be spot on. I said that belongs to Chinese museums, academic world, and to study. But this show is about these whole Western, met their group of people, how they viewed Chinese fashion in relation to history and culture, a lot of other things, connection. It's an interpretation. It's like a Chinese designer can do, say, African-inspired fashion. And it doesn't make that Chinese designer the expert of African culture. They just take some inspiration and curate your own a collection. I mean, they don't have to become an expert on Africa to do an African-inspired collection.
I think that
and the same with exhibition.
I agree. I think for most designers, most artists are visually driven, so they get their inspiration from aesthetics and from visuals. So I always think about Roland Barthes. He talks about how the world's a world of signs, empty signs, and you're free to pick signs and create something out of these signs, which was a reference to Japan when he first went to Japan. And most designers, John, for example, Ralph, who was also in the exhibition, they approach not just Chinese culture, but their own culture visually. So, when they talk about America, they talk about, the pioneer, or they talk about the cowboy. So they're creating a mythology, their own mythology. It's sort of like an auto-Orientalism as opposed to a sort of another form of Orientalism. But I loved that. I love the debates that surrounded that exhibition, because I think shows like magazines should be provocative. They should be a platform to confront ideas and prejudices and long-standing sort of like notions about, in this particular case, fashion. So I think what you do is the same thing. You present ideas through your magazine.
We must do more.
And you challenge and provoke people to think differently about fashion.
I think we must do more. Even this discussion convinces me we must do more, because you mentioned the Chinese themed exhibition, right? And I feel that until we Chinese learn to be comfortable to look at our own culture from a different point of view and see the humor in that, or see the point in that, see whatever criticism or in that, they wouldn't be able to create new things and recreate them, new things. I think we, as a nation, or as an individual, I think that it's important to have that sense of humor and that sense of perspective. And if you just keep looking at yourself the same way, you can't move on. You have to learn, even on an individual level, when you're stuck on a career path or stuck in a relationship, you need to look outside of you in order to look inside of you, right?
Absolutely.
You need to look, learn to look from your partner's, everybody's point of view to look at yourself more clearly. And then you start to look at yourself. And I feel that's really what you just inspired me. And that's why these young Chinese designers you met are interesting, because they've gone beyond the borders, but they come back as well. they operate, at least they have acquired quite a level of different perspectives.
Absolutely.
And that's why you start to see more confident rendering of Chinese elements. That you you didn't see even
That's
10 years ago or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
5, 6 years ago even, basically there were two categories. There was one category of very Chinese, like Guo Pei everybody, very. And there's a category of totally Western fashion inspired. And now, these 2 years, I think, these 2 years, you start to see the very authentic merging of the two. The Chinese element is not because I want to be Chinese, you know, like politically correct reason. It's just they naturally think those elements are cool. They love them. And they introduce them in their very contemporary, sort of international based, or you say Western based, whatever, that fashion language. So the fashion language is Western, but the cultural, the spirit is authentically Chinese, and the Chinese from a Chinese that's not totally just Chinese, but a Chinese who can see everywhere else as well.
I agree, and I think you put your finger on it when you said confident. There was there was an ease and a quiet confidence to all of the designers I spoke to, and that was what was really inspiring. There's one of the guys who was talking about gender fluidity in one of his collections. So interesting.
The first collection, you know, just graduated.
Really, and you know, it's, and I think that's what's interesting at the moment. It are those issues, and you're seeing, and they were talking about using different types of models in the runway, shapes, different genders, third genders, and I think that was what was interesting, is that there was they were engaging with contemporary issues, but as you say, it was through a really easy, confident sort of lens. They were really inspiring. Yeah.
I think maybe just think about that idea of curating something small. I don't know, it could be something with the magazine, but with a tiny exhibition, not quite a big exhibition, but presentation through a certain thread. It doesn't need to be huge, but that, however small it is, I think is going to be very impactful.
No, it's absolutely.
To say that this is the beginning of modern Chinese fashion.
But the variety was what was interesting too. Didn't you feel like every 12, 14 designers?
I think there's 12 there, 12. Right, today? 11, yeah.
They all had such a unique perspective. Yeah. And that was what's interesting, is that there was an originality and an individuality to all of them, and a unique voice. And that was what was confident, was that they were able to project and talk articulately about their work. And each of them was so different from the next. And that was really interesting.
Yeah, and they selected them well, right, from their big collection. And I'm sure you agree. When you spoke to them, talked to them, you feel that it is him or it is her.
Absolutely.
It's not trying to copy someone. You know, you can have the feeling that is actually what he's trying to do. Apart from maybe a couple of them, because they're really new, really young. Still experimenting, but it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, this is something to think about. Maybe that's not ready for exhibition yet. Maybe it's something we can do in the magazine,
exactly.
And by way of video.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, video is a curating job, right? If let's say you know, we showcase something that is really Chinese, but contemporary Chinese fashion. How we do it, that might be interesting and different from when you do your day job.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's and we don't do exhibition because it would be too easy for you and maybe not up to your level. But if we treat it as a magazine video, whatever, this project, maybe you look at it slightly differently, even though you do your video.
No, oh my gosh, I would love to. I would love to.
Yeah, it's to find the time.
Yeah.
Maybe that will combine with your visit with Wendy. You come once a year, right?
Yeah, absolutely, once a year, and I think it's a nice way, because part of the, I mean, what's so nice about Wendy's very generous endowment of my position is that it's allowing the Met to have a much wider audience, and not only to share the work we do in China, but also to learn about, because I said, to my shame, I only knew one of the designers downstairs, Xiao Li, and the others I didn't know. So it was really inspiring.
Of course, when Anna and you guys came, you were just busy fundraising. I was like, how about these designers? I mean, that's Anna, goal-oriented. I need to do that. Now Chinese project finished. Okay, I'm off. Of course, all this is not going ongoing. But but it is. But I have to say, back then, they were not ready, the designers. I think this couple of years,
what changed, do you think, Angelica? What do you think changed?
Well, like everything about the world is that, Chinese started to go out. At first, we made the economy, everything, the open door policy from the Cultural Revolution. We opened our doors. I was the first generation. We benefited from education, everything. We went overseas, then we came back. And then I think this generation is, if I was slightly older or married, not had children earlier or whatever, my child probably would be, well, not quite that level, but some similar. So when they come back, they just don't have that cultural insecurity.
Absolutely, that's so
I
interesting.
mean, my generation of designers, either like, I am Chinese designer, like a pat on the shoulder, like Crusader, or they don't,
So
I
interesting.
mean, you take, usually when someone can really criticize yourself, that someone has become a stronger person. Usually, a weaker person, you tend to, when you are attacked, you defend yourself. No. But when you actually can absorb it and think about it and express it again, that's why in Tai Chi, in Chinese culture, I think Tai Chi is a very high level of achievement, the real Tai Chi. Because the Tai Chi thing is like all these Asian Chinese Buddhist thoughts, is that you absorb first, right? And then you push it out softly. This is all related, but that takes a lot of, you think about on the battlefield, if you confront your enemy, and to fight back is the natural reaction, but to take in and then find a way to go out is an art form. And that's why these kids, I think they went everywhere. They saw exhibition, they were educated, they come back, they look at Chinese culture not as something that's a task for them to do, and not something as old-fashioned, and not something as something just to put their mark on in the fashion of the world to say I'm a Chinese designer. I think they just can't naturally do it.
So I agree.
It took 20 years.
You put the finger on the, whatever that phrase is, in terms of the fact that there was no cultural insecurity, and I think that was exactly what it is made the confidence that you're talking about. Is that because I think even the response to China Through the Looking Glass, I think slightly spoke of cultural insecurity, and I think that the new generation, one of the designers I talked about saw the exhibition and was inspired by it, and I think it is that. I think there's a new confidence, a new cultural confidence that there. And
I'm sure it played a part in all the growth of all these designers, that exhibition. I'm sure, a lot of these pieces can be so beautiful. I'm sure if I were a young designer, a lot of them were looking at these, right, from different designers, not all from Chinese, right? I'm sure some of them would look at these to say, they could be so beautiful, so admired. Maybe I should try something.
But it's interesting that when you spoke to many of them in terms of which designer has inspired you the most. The most consistent was John Galliano.
I know.
Isn't that amazing? So he, across the board, he was probably the one that many of the designers spoke about. That John Galliano was the one that they felt was, which is amazing. So it's not Virgil, it's not Detmar from Balenciaga, it's John, and who is one of our national treasures in terms of fashion.
What do you think he's doing at Margiela?
I think it's really wonderful, because I think that he. What's great, I think that increasingly, season after season, he gets stronger and stronger, because I think obviously to begin with, he had to be very respectful of the vocabulary of Margiela, And I think he's getting more confident in asserting his own sort of vocabulary, but still marrying it. It's like Carl, what Carl did with Chanel. You know, the genius of Carl at Chanel was to look at the codes of Chanel, but present them in a new way. And I think that's what John is doing. You know, he's presenting the codes of Margiela in his way, and his voice gets stronger and stronger every season. The last one, we actually since his very first artisanal collection, we've acquired a piece from every collection he's done so far.
My God, his work obviously for the museum.
It's just extraordinary, and I think that, you know, there's a sort of a new authenticity and honesty to John's work when he went to Margiela. I felt that he was like the work he used to do in the late 80s, you know, when he first began working, the Incroyable collection, the Fallen Angels collection, and I felt he'd gone back to his roots a little bit. So
would you do a?
Oh my God,
something
I would die to do a John show, to do an exhibition on John.
But that would require Dior to collaborate. No?
Yeah, Dior would have to collaborate because it would be his work, you know, obviously his own work, and also Dior and Margiela. I think there's very few designers living today who can sustain and warrant a retrospective in an art museum, and John is number one. You know, he's one of the designers who really he can sustain and he warrants his a retrospective.
I think he should relaunch his brand in China. He'll have a lot of fans and followings.
Oh, his brand in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying.
Does Margiela do what? Does it?
No, John.
Oh, John.
I think so. You know, when we post things on social media, usually, right?
I think he was popular at a time that a lot of this generation started knowing about fashion. You know, the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
When we did those collections,
Dior.
those kids who admired his work now have become like the voice of fashion now as consumers as well. So.
It's so heartwarming, isn't it? I was so moved when they were consistently John.
Oh yeah,
John.
Because we
so
can
nice
tell from our social media, even when we post Ralph Simon, when we post Margot Assia, I think there always comments like the best still John Galliano.
Oh really?
You know, nobody's
Isn't it
good. These are all rubbish. You know,
Yeah.
this John was the real Dior. You know, those sort of things.
Yeah.
You see that still. It's interesting.
But when you went through the Dior show in Paris, you know, John just stands out. You know, I think there was
that was the golden era of fashion almost.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
He represented the big brands, big shows, big designers era, and now there's nobody big, no big design, no big editor, no big everything. You know, everything has become so democratic in some way. So it's good that the world has become more democratic, embrace it, but then you have to live with the downside of that. Is that there's no big anything now. You know, we're all part of the landscape.
I miss those great shows John used to do at Dior. You know, the train coming into the station, and Mark at Vuitton. You know, Mark also staged those incredible theatrical spectacles. You know, and they were, you know, extravaganzas, and because part of fashion is about spectacle. You know, and one shouldn't be ashamed of that. One shouldn't be ashamed of, like, I mean, people always, curators in the museum, you know, look down on, you know, Harold Coder, my previous boss, always said that the Costume Institute was like the pretty sister who got all the dates but none of the respect. And, you know, he's sort of right. You know, it's almost as like curators think exhibitions shouldn't entertain. They should entertain. They should be provocative, confrontational, but they should entertain as well. You should come away from an exhibition and feel as if you've been entertained. What's wrong with an exhibition entertaining you?
Exactly, because anyway, I guess what Gucci is doing now with Alessandro is a spectacle in a different way.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just he's doing it in the way that probably suits contemporary culture.
Absolutely.
So it's still a spectacle.
It is, yes. Yeah.
People always want it, you know, people want to see. So
it's very true.
So think about that little mini curation job with Vogue China.
I will. I would love to do that,
we'll continue with the dialogue. We'll do this dialogue again. No?
Okay, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this.
I wonder next year. when you come and see the designers who would be.
I can't wait, yeah.
It would be interesting. But at least you would probably, after this, you'll pay a little bit more attention to what's happening to them.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
thank you.
I think we've done too much. Right? And you must edit out a lot, but they will, because we were talking rubbish.